Commander Lucas Kane leaned back in the pilot's seat of his sleek Terran Federation scout ship, the Horizon. His routine scouting mission through the far reaches of uncharted space had been uneventful thus far. XO3, a desolate planet on the edge of known space, was his final stop before heading back to base. The planet had earned a reputation as a place to avoid, given its unpredictable weather and the hostile creatures that prowled its barren landscapes. But for Kane, it was just another mission in a long line of missions that blurred together in the cold void of space. His ship cruised through the inky darkness as the red and blue nebulae surrounding XO3 shimmered in the distance. Kane sighed, scanning the empty space ahead. Just as he was about to lean back and let autopilot take over, an alarm blared across the console, red lights flashing in sync with the high-pitched beep. Unidentified vessel in distress. Requesting immediate assistance. The robotic voice of the ship's AI crackled through the comms. Kane straightened up, pulling up the data feed. His sensors had picked up a small craft under heavy attack, plummeting toward XO3's surface. Zooming in, he caught sight of several vicious, winged creatures known as Evoker tearing at the ship's hull with razor-sharp talons. These beasts were native to XO3, known for their savage aggression toward anything that intruded on their territory. "Damn it," Kane muttered. "Looks like I'm not going home just yet." The Federation's rules were clear: assist any Allied vessels in distress, regardless of the circumstances. But the ship wasn't a standard Terran craft, it was alien, bearing the distinctive, sleek design of the Turavians, an enigmatic species that kept mostly to themselves. Kane had heard rumors about the Turavians, but they were notoriously secretive, rarely interacting with other species except under strict diplomatic protocols. As the creatures continued their brutal assault, Kane knew there was no time to hesitate. He gripped the controls and dove into action, activating his ship's pulse cannons. The Horizon streaked toward the fray, unleashing bright blue pulses of energy. The Evoker shrieked, their membranous wings flapping wildly as they broke formation, momentarily stunned by the surprise attack. "Come on, you ugly bastards. Let's see what you've got." Kane expertly maneuvered through the debris field surrounding the alien ship, targeting the Evoker with deadly precision. One by one, they fell, disintegrating under the powerful blasts. But the fight wasn't without cost. His ship's shields took several hits from stray plasma bursts, and alarms blared as power levels dipped. After a tense few minutes, the last Evoker fell, its body spiraling toward the planet below. Kane allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but it was short-lived. The alien craft had suffered critical damage during the attack and was descending rapidly, flames and smoke trailing from its engines as it plummeted toward the planet's surface. "Looks like I'm going in," Kane muttered to himself. He initiated pursuit, locking onto the alien vessel's trajectory. The descent into XO3's atmosphere was rough. The violent winds buffeted the horizon, and electrical storms lit up the sky with bursts of blue and white. Kane gripped the controls, forcing the ship through the turbulence, following the faint signal of the alien craft as it disappeared below the clouds. XO3's surface was a desolate wasteland. Jagged black rocks jutted out from the ground, and the air was thick with dust and ash. In the distance, Kane spotted the downed alien ship, smoking and sparking as it lay in a crumpled heap at the base of a rocky cliff. Kane landed his ship nearby and quickly donned his survival suit, knowing the atmosphere of XO3 was barely breathable for humans. As he exited the horizon, the scorching heat and dry winds hit him immediately. He activated his suit's filtration system, then grabbed his medkit and energy rifle before making his way toward the wreckage. The alien craft was even more damaged than he thought. A large gash ran along its side, and flames still flickered from the ruined engines. Kane approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of life. The Federation scanners had picked up one life form aboard, but there was no telling what state it was in after the crash. As he neared the ship, a faint movement caught his eye. Through the wreckage, he saw a figure slumped against the interior wall of the craft. She was unmistakably Turavian, tall and lithe, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her long, violet hair was matted with blood, and her breathing was shallow. Her eyes fluttered open as Kane approached, filled with pain and desperation. "Stay still," Kane said, kneeling beside her. "I'm here to help." Her eyes widened in recognition, but she was too weak to speak. He quickly scanned her for injuries, noting several deep gashes along her arms and torso. Turavians were known for their accelerated healing, but these wounds were severe, and without immediate medical attention, she wouldn't survive much longer. Kane activated his medkit, injecting her with a serum designed to stabilize her vitals. She winced as the serum took effect, but her breathing soon became more even, and the bleeding began to slow. "You're going to be okay," Kane assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure of it himself. As he worked, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Did you save me?" Kane hesitated. He didn't know how to explain Terran protocols to her, or why his sense of duty had compelled him to intervene. Instead, he gave a simple answer. "Because I could." The Taravian woman stared at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place: gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. Before he could dwell on it, another alarm blared from his wrist communicator. His ship was alerting him to an incoming storm-ade massive electrical front that would make it impossible to stay on the surface for much longer. "We need to get you out of here," Kane said, glancing at the sky as dark clouds began to roll in. He moved to lift her, but she suddenly grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No," she rasped. "You don't understand what you've done." Kane frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" Before she could respond, a loud crack echoed through the air, and Kane looked up just in time to see bolts of lightning tearing across the sky, headed directly for them. He didn't have time to ask more questions. "We'll talk later," he said, hoisting her into his arms. "Right now, we need to survive." As he carried her back to the horizon, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something far more complicated was happening than he had bargained for. The Taravian woman had warned him, but what had she meant? What had he set in motion by saving her life? He had no idea that his actions had triggered a chain of events that would lead him into the heart of an ancient tradition, one that would change his life forever. The cold metallic interior of the horizon felt suffocatingly silent as Commander Lucas Kane carefully laid Kalara, the Taravian woman he had rescued, on one of the ship's medical beds. Her breathing was shallow but steady, the serum he had administered earlier working to stabilize her. Outside, XO3's turbulent atmosphere howled and cracked with violent storms, but Kane's mind was already elsewhere. He stared down at Kalara, her silver skin still glowing faintly under the ship's harsh artificial lights. Though she appeared alien in nearly every way, there was something undeniably human about the worry etched into her expression, even in her unconscious state. What had she meant earlier when she warned him about what he'd done? Kane couldn't shake the cryptic words from his mind. He had saved her, yes, but at what cost? As if responding to his silent question, Kalara's violet eyes fluttered open. She blinked several times, disoriented, before her gaze finally locked onto his. She tried to sit up, wincing from the pain in her side. Kane rushed over, gently pressing her back down. "Easy, you're still injured," he said softly. "You need rest." Kalara shook her head. "No. You don't understand. There's no time for rest. You've changed everything by saving me." Kane raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I just did what any decent person would do, help someone in trouble. Isn't that normal for your people too?" She gave a bitter smile, her eyes filling with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "For us, it's not that simple. What you did, it's far more complicated. By saving me, you invoked an ancient Taravian tradition, one that binds us together in ways you cannot imagine." Kane's heart rate spiked. His mind raced, searching for any information he'd ever come across about Taravian customs. He knew they were a proud and reclusive people, bound by traditions far older than most species in the galaxy. But this? What could she possibly mean by binding them together? Start from the beginning, Kane said slowly. What's this tradition? And what does it have to do with me? Kalara hesitated, clearly weighing how much she should tell him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. In Taravian culture, there is a sacred rite known as the purity bond. It is one of our oldest and most unbreakable traditions. The bond is initiated when one life is saved by another. In doing so, you are no longer just the one who saved me. You become responsible for my purity, my existence, in a way. Purity? Kane echoed, confused. What do you mean by purity? Is this some kind of spiritual thing? Kalara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Not in the way you think, she replied. To us, purity isn't about physical chastity, but the preservation of the connection between one's body, mind, and spirit. It is the essence of who we are. When someone is saved from death, that balance is disrupted. Our tradition dictates that the Savior, the one who prevented the soul from passing on, must become the one to restore that balance. Kane's eyes widened. Restore it how? Her gaze fell, and for the first time, Kane saw the weight of the words she was about to speak press heavily on her. Through a ritual, she said quietly. A deeply personal one. It is called the rite of merging. Once performed, it links the Savior and the saved, bonding them on every level spiritually, mentally, physically. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Kane felt his stomach twist. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, and certainly not someone who was prepared for something like this. The idea of being forced into a ritual, one that sounded dangerously close to some kind of forced union, was more than unsettling. His first instinct was to protest, to argue that this was impossible. But as he looked into Kalara's eyes, he could see the sincerity there, and the depth of her own discomfort. You're telling me that because I saved your life, I'm now obligated to, what, complete some sort of sacred bond with you? Kane asked, incredulous. Kalara nodded solemnly. Yes. If the bond is not completed, I will be considered impure, and I will be exiled from my people. A life of isolation and shame awaits me. Kane's mind raced. He could hardly comprehend the idea. Exile? For what? This isn't your fault. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, Kalara said, her voice breaking slightly. The tradition is clear. I was saved, and now we are bound. If we do not fulfill the bond, I will be cast out. My people will view me as incomplete, spiritually unbalanced. And you? You would be seen as the one responsible for my disgrace. Kane's heart sank. He had never asked for this. All he had done was help someone in need, and now he found himself entangled in the customs of a society he barely understood. The weight of the situation settled on his shoulders, and for the first time in years, he felt powerless. He had been trained to face impossible odds, to fight against enemies and overcome physical obstacles, but this was something he couldn't shoot his way out of. There has to be a way out of this, Kane muttered, more to himself than to Kalara. Some way to break the tradition, or dash. There is no breaking it, Kalara interrupted, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Not without severe consequences for both of us. Kane stood up and began pacing the small mid-bay, frustration bubbling up inside him. This wasn't fair to either of them. Kalara was clearly as trapped by this as he was. He didn't want to be the cause of her exile, but he also didn't want to be forced into something he didn't fully understand. His mind was swimming with questions, doubts, and moral dilemmas. There is another way, Kalara said after a long pause, her voice tentative. We can go to Taravia, my homeworld. The Council of Elders may offer guidance, perhaps even an alternative. They are the keepers of our traditions. If anyone can find a solution, it's them. Kane stopped pacing and looked at her. You think they'd break tradition for us? I don't know, she admitted. But I don't see any other choice. We must go to them. If we don't, the bond will hang over us like a shadow, and I will be exiled. At the very least, the elders may show you what this bond truly means. Kane ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her words settle in. This wasn't just a personal crisis for him, it was a matter of honor and survival for Kalara. Her entire future rested on what happened next. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. We'll go to Terravia. We'll talk to your elders and figure this out. Kalara nodded, relief and gratitude evident in her eyes, but there was still a tension between them, a tension that neither of them could fully acknowledge. As Kane left the medbay to prepare for the journey, he couldn't help but wonder if this bond, this tradition, was truly inescapable. What would it mean for him, for her, if the elders insisted the ritual must be completed? And could he live with the consequences, no matter what they were? As the ship's engines roared to life and they broke through XO3's atmosphere, Kane's thoughts lingered on Kalara. He had saved her life, but at what cost? The answer, it seemed, would lie on the mysterious world of Terravia, where tradition ruled over all. The stars streaked past the viewports of the horizon as it hurtled through space, leaving the desolate planet XO3 far behind. For Commander Lucas Kane, the silence of deep space usually brought comfort, a quiet reprieve from the chaos of battle and mission briefings. But now, the silence only heightened the tension that hung in the air between him and his unexpected passenger. Kalara sat across from him in the ship's small galley, her violet eyes scanning the data on her wrist device. Her long, silver hair shimmered faintly under the sterile lights, but her expression remained distant, as if her mind was a million light-years away. Kane watched her quietly, nursing a cup of hot coffee. He wanted to say something, anything to break the thick cloud of uncertainty that had settled over them ever since they left XO3. The journey to Terravia would take several days, even at the ship's top speed. That gave them time, perhaps too much time, to dwell on the situation they were in. Neither of them had spoken much since agreeing to seek the guidance of the Taravian Council of Elders. The more Kane thought about it, the more questions gnawed at him, and the more the weight of the unknown pressed down on him. Finally, Kalara broke the silence. "You're uncomfortable," she said, her voice soft but pointed. Kane blinked, surprised by the bluntness of her statement. "I wouldn't say uncomfortable. More like confused." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "Confused by our tradition? Or by me?" "Both, I guess," Kane admitted, leaning back in his chair. "You and I come from very different worlds, Kalara. We don't have anything like this purity bond where I'm from. And to be honest, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about all this. I've always been taught that personal choices, especially ones that involve intimacy, are made freely, not because of some ancient custom." Kalara's expression softened as she listened. She seemed to appreciate his honesty, even if his words stung. "I understand," she said quietly. "It's not an easy concept for outsiders to grasp. I've spent much of my life studying other cultures, and I know that many see our ways as outdated or restrictive. But for us, tradition is not just a set of rules, it is the foundation of our existence, the thread that binds us together as a people." Kane frowned, leaning forward slightly. "But why does that tradition have to involve something so personal? I mean, we don't even know each other. Why would your people force this on us just because I saved your life?" Kalara sighed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not about force, not in the way you think. The purity bond isn't meant to punish or control. It's meant to protect. When a life is saved, it creates an imbalance, a disruption in the natural flow of one's existence. The bond restores that balance. Without it, the saved soul is considered incomplete, vulnerable. It's not just a physical bond, Kane. It's a merging of our minds and spirits, a way to ensure that we are both made whole again. Kane stared at her, his mind spinning as he tried to process her words. He wanted to understand, but everything about this seemed so alien to him, so contrary to the way he had been raised to think about life and relationships. "So, what happens to me if we go through with this bond?" he asked. "Am I supposed to just give up my life? My autonomy? Will I still be me?" Kalara hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "You will still be yourself, but we will share a connection, a deep one. I will feel your thoughts, your emotions, and you will feel mine. We will not lose ourselves, but we will no longer be alone." It is difficult to explain in words. But I know that for someone like you, it must seem like an invasion, a loss of freedom. Kane shook his head slowly. It's not just about freedom. It's about choice. I didn't ask for this, and neither did you. And now, it feels like we're being forced into something we're not ready for. The silence between them grew heavier, weighed down by the reality of their situation. Kalara looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "I didn't ask for this either," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to be bound by this tradition. But it is my fate. And now, because you saved me, it has become your fate as well." Kane felt a pang of guilt. He had acted on instinct when he rescued her, not knowing the consequences it would bring for either of them. He had never meant to entangle himself or her in this complex web of tradition and obligation. But now, they were both caught in it, with no easy way out. "We'll find a way through this," Kane said, his voice firm. "We'll talk to your council. Maybe they can help us find another way. I don't believe we're doomed to follow this path just because tradition says so." Kalara gave him a small, sad smile. "You are kind to think that way, but the council does not easily bend to change. They are the keepers of our laws, and those laws have stood for millennia. Still, I hope you are right. Perhaps they will see reason in your words." Kane nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. The more he learned about Taravian society, the more rigid and unyielding it seemed. If the council insisted on upholding the purity bond, what then? Would he have to submit to this ancient ritual, binding himself to Kalara forever? And if he refused? Would she truly be exiled, cast out from her people because of his choice? He couldn't bear the thought of condemning her to that kind of life, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was being taken from both of them, something as fundamental as their ability to choose their own futures. As the days passed, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Kane and Kalara began to open up to one another in ways neither had expected. At first, their discussions were formal, focusing on their respective cultures and traditions. Kalara shared stories of Taravia's long history, its beautiful cities of crystal and light, and the deep spiritual connection her people had with their world. Kane, in turn, spoke of Earth, its bustling cities, its diverse landscapes, and the constant push for progress that drove humanity forward. But soon, the conversation shifted. Kane found himself telling her about his childhood growing up in a small town on Earth, his early dreams of becoming a pilot, and the losses he had suffered as a soldier. He spoke of the comrades he had lost, the battles that haunted him, and the lonely nights spent staring at the stars, wondering if there was more to life than war and duty. Kalara listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy. She, too, had known loss. Her family had perished in a catastrophic event on her homeworld, leaving her an orphan at a young age. She had been raised by scholars, dedicating her life to the study of other cultures in the hopes of finding some deeper meaning in the universe. "We are more alike than I expected," Kalara said one evening, as they shared a simple meal in the ship's galley. "We have both lost much, and yet here we are, on this strange journey together." Kane smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah. Funny how the universe works, isn't it?" For the first time since the journey began, they both shared a quiet laugh. But the weight of the unknown still loomed over them. Their growing bond was undeniable, but neither of them knew what it meant or what it would lead to when they finally reached Terravia. As the horizon approached Terravia, the planet came into view on the ship's monitors. It was breathtaking. The surface shimmered with iridescent hues of blue, silver, and green, like a living crystal. Massive, intricate cities stretched out beneath sparkling skies, while vast forests of bioluminescent trees lit the landscape in an ethereal glow. Kane couldn't help but stare in awe. "It's beautiful." Kalara smiled softly beside him. "Yes, it is. My people have always sought harmony with our world. We take only what we need, and we give back in kind." Kane's admiration for the Terravians grew, but so did his apprehension. This was her home, her people. And in a few short hours, they would be facing the council, the very leaders who held their fate in their hands. As they descended toward the capital city, Kalara placed a hand on Kane's arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "No matter what happens, Kane," she said quietly, "thank you. For saving me. For coming with me. You didn't have to, and yet you did. For that, I am grateful." Kane met her gaze, his heart heavy with the unspoken tension between them. "We're in this together, Kalara. Whatever happens, we'll face it. We'll figure it out." She nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes mirrored his own. As the horizon landed in the center of Terravia's capital, Kane's pulse quickened. This was it. They were about to confront the elders, to seek answers or perhaps condemnation. And as they stepped off the ship and into the radiant light of Terravia's gleaming city, Kane couldn't help but wonder, had their bond already begun to form, long before the ritual? And if so, what did that mean for the choice he would soon be forced to make? The grand capital of Terravia was unlike anything Kane had ever seen. The city shimmered under the light of twin suns, its towering crystalline spires casting refracted rainbows across the streets. The buildings, with their smooth, flowing architecture, looked almost alive-grown rather than built. As Kane and Kalara made their way through the bustling crowds of Terravians, he couldn't help but notice the solemn reverence with which the citizens carried themselves. The air seemed to hum with energy, as if the planet itself was a living entity, woven deeply into the people's lives. Kalara walked beside him, her face a mixture of tension and determination. She hadn't spoken much since they disembarked from the horizon, but Kane could sense the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. Ahead, the gleaming white steps of the Hall of Elders loomed, an ancient structure that radiated an imposing energy. It was here that they would seek their answers, and here that their fate would be decided. Kane's heart raced as they approached the entrance. He had faced down enemies in battle, survived countless dangerous missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. He was about to challenge the traditions of an ancient and powerful society, one that viewed their bond as sacred and inviolable. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Kalara stopped at the base of the steps, her hand lightly touching Kane's arm. "Before we enter, I need to know. Are you truly ready for this? There is no guarantee the council will show mercy. They may insist on the ritual. If that happens, I don't want you to feel forced into something you don't want." Kane met her gaze, searching her eyes for answers. Despite the uncertainty and fear swirling inside him, he couldn't deny the connection that had grown between them during their journey. It was deeper than mere friendship, though he couldn't fully explain it. And while the idea of the ritual terrified him, the thought of abandoning her to face exile alone was unthinkable. "I don't know what's going to happen in there," Kane said softly, "but I know one thing. I'm not going to let you go through this alone. Whatever the council decides, we'll face it together." Kalara's expression softened, and for a brief moment she smiled a small, but genuine smile that brought warmth to her otherwise somber features. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've already done more than I could have ever asked." With that, they turned and ascended the steps, entering the vast, echoing halls of the Elder Chamber. The Chamber of Elders was a circular room of gleaming crystal, its high ceiling adorned with swirling patterns of light that seemed to pulse in time with the quiet murmurs of the counselors seated in a semicircle at the far end. The elders themselves were ancient, their silver skin nearly translucent, their eyes glowing faintly with the wisdom of countless centuries. Each wore a flowing white robe, their presence commanding but serene. Kalara and Cain stood before them, side by side, as a low hum filled the room. One of the elders, an impossibly old woman with eyes like molten silver, rose from her seat, her voice resonating with a calm authority. Kalara of House Myri, she began, her tone both formal and compassionate. You stand before us because the ancient right of the purity bond has been invoked. The life you once owed to the great stream of existence has been restored to you by this outsider, Commander Lucas Cain. Do you understand the gravity of this? Kalara bowed her head. I do, Elder Vassala. The elder turned her gaze to Cain, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. Commander Cain, you are a stranger to our ways. Yet, by saving Kalara's life, you have become a part of our most sacred tradition. The purity bond is not one that can be undone lightly. Do you understand the commitment that is now placed before you? Cain straightened, trying to maintain his composure under the elder's penetrating stare. I've learned a lot about your customs, but I can't say I fully understand it all. What I do know is that I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to help. I didn't know it would lead to this. Elder Vassala nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Intentions matter little in the face of tradition, Commander. What has been set in motion must be seen through. The purity bond exists to restore balance, not just to Kalara, but to you as well. Without it, her spirit remains incomplete. But more than that, you are now linked to her fate. If the bond remains unfulfilled, both of you will suffer the consequences. Cain felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Consequences? What do you mean? The imbalance will affect you both in ways you cannot foresee, the elder explained. Kalara would be exiled, cast out from her people, forever seen as impure. And you, as the one who saved her, would be bound to that exile, in spirit if not in body. You would carry the weight of her fate, and it would haunt you for the rest of your days. Cain's breath caught in his throat. The elder's words were heavy with finality. He glanced at Kalara, whose face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Isn't there another way? Cain asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Some way to fulfill this without the merging? The room fell into a heavy silence. The elders exchanged glances, their ancient faces unreadable. Finally, Elder Vassala spoke again. The rite of merging is the most direct way to restore the balance. It involves a deep bond, not just of body, but of mind and spirit. Through this ritual, your thoughts, emotions, and memories will be shared. You will know each other as no others can. The bond will be unbreakable. Cain's pulse quickened. The thought of sharing his innermost self with Kalara, someone he had only just met, was overwhelming. Yet, he couldn't deny the connection that had already begun to form between them. And if the alternative was exile for her and an unshakable burden for him, he knew there was no real choice. Elder Vassala continued, her voice softer now. There is one other way, though it is rarely used. The elders may oversee a lesser bond, one that connects your spirits without the full merging of minds. It would restore balance, but the connection between you would be much weaker. It is not as pure as the rite of merging, but it may be acceptable under these circumstances. Cain glanced at Kalara. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were filled with an unspoken question. What did he want? What was he willing to do? His mind raced. The lesser bond would free them both from the most intimate aspects of the ritual, but it would also leave them as distant strangers, bound only by tradition, not by any true connection. The rite of merging, on the other hand, would link them forever, a bond that went beyond words, a bond of shared souls. Cain took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always been a man of action, someone who faced danger head-on. This was no different, even if the stakes were far more personal than any battle he had ever fought. "I choose the right of merging," Kane said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it the right way." Kalara's eyes widened in surprise, but there was a flicker of something else there, to relief, perhaps, or gratitude. She nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "I agree, elders. Let us complete the rite." The elders murmured among themselves, their faces impassive. Finally, Elder Vasala raised her hand, and the room fell silent. "Very well," she said. "The rite of merging shall be performed." The ceremony took place in the heart of the Elder Chamber, beneath a towering crystal arch that pulsed with the energy of the planet itself. Kane and Kalara stood opposite each other, the air between them shimmering with an ethereal light. The elders chanted softly in the background, their voices blending with the hum of the crystals, creating a resonant harmony that filled the chamber. Kalara stepped forward first, her violet eyes fixed on Kane's. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Kane nodded, his throat tight. "As ready as I'll ever be." The elders raised their hands, and a brilliant light enveloped the two of them. Kane felt a strange warmth spread through his body, a sensation that wasn't entirely physical. His mind seemed to open, expanding outward, reaching toward Kalara's presence. And then, suddenly, he felt her thoughts, her emotions, her very essence flowing into him. He gasped as a flood of images flashed before his eyes, Kalara as a child, running through the glowing forests of Terravia, her laughter echoing in the air, her parents, their faces filled with love before they were lost to tragedy, her years of loneliness, of searching for meaning through study and exploration. He felt her fear when the evoker attacked, her relief when he saved her, and her growing connection to him as they traveled together. At the same time, he felt her inside his mind, experiencing his memories, his childhood on Earth, his military training, the pain of losing comrades in battle, the endless loneliness of space. She saw his struggles, his doubts, and his unspoken longing for something more than the life of a soldier. The merging was overwhelming, almost too much to bear. But as the light around them grew brighter, Kane felt something shift. The fear, the uncertainty, the weight of tradition, it all melted away, replaced by a deep sense of unity, of understanding. Kalara was no longer just a stranger or a responsibility. She was a part of him now, and he was a part of her. When the light finally faded, they stood together, their minds and souls linked in a way that defied explanation. Kane felt a calm settle over him, a strange sense of peace. The bond had been completed, and yet it didn't feel like a loss of freedom. It felt right. Kalara smiled softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We are one now," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "And yet, we are still ourselves." Kane smiled back, his heart light for the first time in what felt like years. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely audible. "We are." The elders lowered their hands, their expressions serene. "The rite is complete," Elder Vasala said. "You are bound now, in mind and spirit. Go forth together, and may your bond bring you both peace and strength." Kane and Kalara exchanged a glance, their connection now deeper than words. As they left the Elder Chamber and stepped out into the radiant light of Terravia's twin suns, Kane couldn't help but feel that this strange journey had led him to something far more profound than he had ever expected. He had saved her life, but in doing so, he had found a part of himself he hadn't known was missing.